people in the day from Darwin's time onward were kind of got enamored of his mechanism because mostly they couldn't see the molecular level, as we mentioned, only until recently. And so they closed their eyes and imagined, fish swimming along and then suddenly growing legs and going up on a beach. And it was heavily dependent on the imaginations of the scientists who were working on it. But when you get to the nuts and the bolts, and in life, the nuts and bolts are at the molecular level, then it becomes pretty close to impossible to see how that could work.
I want to get to where you significantly contributed to the field, and that's with irreducible complexity. I would love for you to just unpack this for us, because I was just recently talking to a colleague and I was like, hey, have you heard about irreducible complexity? And he had no idea. And I got to share it with him and he was like, wow, I never thought of it like that. So maybe unpack that for our listeners today.
Sure. Irreducible complexity is kind of it's a phrase. It sounds fancy, but it stands for a simple idea. It just means you've got some system that does something, but it's made of a number of parts, and all of the parts are needed, and they work on each other, with each other, to produce some effect that the parts, again, themselves couldn't do. I talked about the mousetrap a minute or two ago. Mousetrap used as an example in Darwin's black box for irreducible complexity, because if you take away one of the components, say the spring or the wooden base or a number of other different components, it's not like it works half as well as it used to. It doesn't work at all. It's broken. So it needs all of those. So what does this have to do with evolution? Well, in The Origin of Species, Darwin had a chapter or a section in a chapter. The chapter was called Problems with the Theory, and the section was called Organs of Extreme Perfection. And he tried to tackle things that even back in the 19th century looked really forbiddingly complex. And one example was the eye. And he kind of waved his hands and says, well, here's a simple eye, and here's another more complex. He says, well, maybe evolution could do the same. He never actually showed how that could happen, but he tried to convince people that that his theory could even account for very complex stuff. But in concluding that section, he wrote an interesting phrase. He said that if it could be shown that there were any organ that could not be made by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And the reason he said that is that he knew that if in his idea, evolution had to work, in tiny steps over long periods of time, improving things slowly and slowly, because if things appeared to improve in leaps rapidly, then it would look very suspiciously as if something other than chance were involved there. So he always insisted on this gradualism to evolution. Well, if you think about it, what sort of thing can't be built by numerous successive slight modifications? Well, think about a mousetrap. If you start with nothing, what are you going to, suppose you get a piece of wood for the platform, and is that going to catch mice? That doesn't catch any mice. And suppose you put on it a little piece of metal that'll later act as the hammer. That doesn't do anything yet either, because you don't have the spring or anything else. So that was a challenge to Darwin's criterion of numerous successive slight modifications, because it turns out that Darwin's theory can do some things, but it's limited in that if you need only one change, one tiny mutation to help an organism that would benefit an organism, then Darwin's mechanism of random mutation and selection, just what the doctor ordered. It's great for that. You get one tiny change, that's fine. But if you need two changes before you get a helpful effect, if you have to push this and then pull this before you get a helpful effect, then it turns out Darwin's mechanism is already, breathing heavily. It can't deal with that. And if you need three things before then, well, you exponentially decrease the likelihood that Darwin's mechanism can work. But as I said, the cell is filled with machinery, and machinery that looks, for all intents and purposes, like it would need a lot of changes, a lot of construction and putting it together. And so it's precisely what you would not expect from a Darwinian mechanism. People in the day from Darwin's time onward were kind of got enamored of his mechanism because mostly they couldn't see the molecular level, as we mentioned, only until recently. And so they closed their eyes and imagined, fish swimming along and then suddenly growing legs and going up on a beach. And it was heavily dependent on the imaginations of the scientists who were working on it. But when you get to the nuts and the bolts, and in life, the nuts and bolts are at the molecular level, then it becomes pretty close to impossible to see how that could work.
Yeah, it's like these mechanisms are all or nothing. Like they're there and they can't possibly come about through that gradual change. And we only know that because we have such great insight into the cell. And again, it's just Darwin didn't have that. To what you just said, irreducible complexity, the mousetrap, the flagellum, that all is so convincing to me. Even if I wasn't a proponent of ID, I would just think that's blatantly obvious. Given the technology we have, given what Darwin didn't have, it's not like a slap against Darwin. He's the worst. He's trying to deceive people. It's just he didn't have the technology and he thought he was right. But what are naturalists saying in response to this? Surely they're pushing back. What are the scientific objections that you've seen and engaged with? Maybe the most common or most prominent that you've engaged with?
Well, that's a good question, and it's particularly good now because my book was published in 1996 and it caused quite a stir, and lots of people gave counter explanations, objections, said, well, wait 10 years and we'll have the answers then. It's your lack of imagination, la di da di da. But it's 30 years later now. So we've got a record. And so we can say, well, okay, what has happened in the meantime? For the poster child example of intelligent design was the bacterial flagellum, which I guess I never actually talked about right here, but probably many of your viewers will be familiar with it. It's kind of like an outboard motor that many bacteria use to swim. It's all really convoluted, complex. It's elegant. It's got a motor. It's got a drive shaft and uses acid from flowing from the outside of the cell to the inside to power its turning. It's just crazy complicated. And I said, well, hey, it's irreducibly complex. There's a purposeful arrangement of parts. It looks like it was intelligently designed. And just kind of knee-jerk reflex, people said, we'll find an answer. And one rebuttal was that why over here's a different molecular machine called a type 3 secretory system that has some proteins that kind of resemble some of the ones in the flagellum. But the type 3 secretory system isn't an outboard motor. It has kind of a sub-function that the flagellum had, in that the flagellum also has to construct itself, unlike machines in our world, which are put together by intelligent agents, or robots, which are made by intelligent agents. The cell has to construct the machinery in it. And take my word for it, that itself is a phenomenally complex process too. And during it, the nascent bacterial flagellum has to actively pump out parts called proteins that make up the exterior part of this outboard motor. Well, there was another little machine that, as I said, sort of kind of resembled it, and it also could pump proteins, but it didn't act as a rotary motor. It would pump proteins into other cells, essentially to kill them. It would act as poison. It was part of a predator-prey relationship. And that's fine. Okay, that's interesting. But just having things that looked like each other doesn't tell you how it was put together.
Right.
Suppose I had a mousetrap and some other, that doesn't tell you how it was put together. Folks talking about that never gave an explanation for how one could come to be the other. They never explained how the secretory system might evolve into a flagellum, which again has this other completely independent function of being a rotary motor, has nothing to do with the function of excreting proteins. They couldn't even tell, if you started with that, how you would get to a flagellum, or even if you had a flagellum, how you get the other way, or anything. They just says why these two things look like each other. And that's not an explanation. And it turns out that a number of years later, about 10 years later, after folks started to point to this, that a group of researchers showed that if you analyze the sequences of a bunch of the proteins involved here, that it looks like the bacterial flagellum, the much more complex machine, arose first in the history of life. And that this other thing, the secretory system, either derived from it or was made independently or came independently. And so there went the story that the first one was somehow a simpler precursor to the second. And since then, pretty much nobody has said anything about the flagellum. There's one person working on comparing sequences of flagella in different organisms in life. And we can now do that a lot more easily because the sequencing of DNA genomes, as you know, is much, much easier than it had been. And what he showed recently is that, well, the flagellum occurs in a number of different lines of bacteria, but they lose it very quickly. It's lost at a rate much faster than it's gained by transferring genes between bacteria. So the long and the short is nobody's explained it. 30 years down the line, very few people even try. And the same is true for every other system that I discussed in Darwin's black box: the blood clotting system, the immune system, the intracellular transport. And nobody has explained any of those things. There's a couple, I would urge people that I discuss these things in the appendix of my last book, Darwin Devolves. So if you're interested in the latest and the situation is still the same, go there. What typically happens is it's an interesting exercise in rhetoric and the social interactions of science, is that somebody with some sort of prestige in science writes an article and says why we have answered this. And then you see later on people cite this all the time. And I might go and post something and say, why this is nonsense. And nobody ever addresses it. They just move on. And so essentially you're ignored. But the long and the short is that I would not change a word of what I wrote in Darwin's black box 30 years down the line. And I could still use all of those as examples of systems that have utterly no explanation in terms of Darwin's theory.
And that's amazing.